Welcome to today's event, Middle East Profile and Trends. Today's event is being recorded on behalf of the Microsoft Corporation. If you do not consent to being part of a recorded session, please disconnect your line at this time. The recording will be available at the same location you joined today's event. To learn more about the ways you can participate in today's event, please click on the Messages button in the lower left-hand corner of your screen. Feel free to let us know if you're ready by typing in a message and selecting Send. We encourage you to interact by using the Messages panel at any time to ask questions regarding content or to request support. We will do our best to answer all your questions, but due to time constraints, we might not be able to answer them all during the live event. Your feedback is important. Please take a few minutes to complete a survey that will appear at the end of the event. Thank you in advance for your support. If you experience any technical difficulties, refresh your browser by pressing Ctrl F5 or the Refresh Now button on the information panel. If this does not resolve the issue, please send in a message and we will be happy to assist. There's also an online test page if you wish to self-support. Simply click the Help button in the Information tab. And now I'd like to introduce your host, Catherine Devine, Global Business Strategy Leader, Libraries and Museums, Microsoft. Catherine, you have the floor.
Great, thanks, Heather. Well, welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody, depending on where you are in the world. Thank you for joining today's webinar, and really excited for today's discussion. We have a great lineup of guests, and also great discussion. I have a fantastic opportunity in my role to see across the libraries and museums industry across the world. And it's always fascinated me how it's so different in different parts of the world, but I'm particularly interested, everyone's doing something different and something great, but I'm really interested in how the Middle East is approaching this space. It's such an important part of the culture of the area, and of course it has its own amazing histories. So today I just want to introduce you to our speakers briefly, and then we're going to launch into a conversation with each one of them. So first, you all know me by now. This is our 6th webinar. I lead strategy for libraries and museums at Microsoft. So that's about thinking about what are the right solutions, what's the right messaging, what are the trends, how can we best support the industry. But our special guest today is Dr. Stefano Carboni. He is with the Ministry of Culture in Saudi Arabia and is CEO of the Museums Commission there. But he has an illustrious career that, amongst other things, included being the curator of Islamic art at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. Also, he was executive director at the Western Australia Art Museum. I'll double check with Stefano that I have that correct. And of course now he's now leading museums in Saudi Arabia. We also have as our guest Ahmed Ameen. Ahmed works for Microsoft. He is the regional education director in the United Arab Emirates. I've had the opportunity to work closely with Ahmed over my time here at Microsoft. He has some really great insights into how the region is thinking about education. And we also have Essam Makhlouf. Essam, some of you may have met in our various travels around the world when we were traveling. Essam is also Microsoft. He works for me as Libraries and Museums Manager in the EMEA region, so Europe, Middle East, Africa. And Essam is based in Cairo. So with that, let me launch into a conversation with Dr. Carboni.
Hello, good morning or good afternoon, and for me, good evening, actually, being in Riyadh. I hope you can see me.
I think just pop your camera on.
Yeah, it is on. So.
Is it? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So interesting. I can only see your avatar.
Okay. It's on from my side, so. And I can see myself at the bottom right, but not in the middle. So I'm not sure technically what's the issue.
Not quite sure technically how to solve this one.
Maybe if we just try turning it off and back on again. Dr.
right.
Carboni, thank you.
Yeah.
There
There
we
you
go.
go.
Thank you
Sure.
so much,
Okay.
Dr. Carboni.
Have you ever seen, there's a great show in UK called the IT Crowd, but anyway, that's the trend of the IT crowd. Just turn it off and on again. So it's a solution to all technical problems. But welcome, Stefano. Really great to have you today. Very excited to be talking to you. I'm maybe you've had such a great international career, and of course you're originally from Italy, correct?
Yes. I'm originally from Venice. That's where I grew up. Yeah.
Yeah, which is also an amazing history and culture. I'm really interested in your perspective, working in museums over the course of your career in so many different countries and in so many leadership roles. What are you seeing as the differences in how each country is approaching museums and particularly with respect to digital transformation?
Well, it would be quite a long conversation, I guess. I started to work at the Metropolitan Museum at the time, exactly at the time when emails started to be used.
Oh, wow.
Email addresses. So in the early 90s, basically at the Met, and it was, as I'm sure you also remember, it was a revolution at the time. So digital transformation was actually being able to communicate in a fast way with colleagues all around the world, basically. And I was in the United States until 2008, and so I really witnessed how the Metropolitan Museum was going from strength to strength in terms of digitization of the collections, in terms of complexity of starting to use the best digital tools. And of course, this was exponential in the years after I left, actually after 2008. So from that point of view, of course, institutions like the Metropolitan Museum and large institutions all across the United States have been at the forefront in embracing digital transformation and trying to use it in best possible ways. Maybe not.
I think we lost the sound for Stefano. Did we? No, I don't think it's on your end. I can't hear. I know Ahmed can't hear.
Am I back?
You are back. Yes,
Okay.
the wonders of the internet.
Okay. Hope it was only a short, yeah. What I was saying is that when I moved to the Argyle, Western Australia, it was like stepping back, actually, in terms of digital technology, digital information, and it took quite a while to try to catch up with the trends. And of course, at that point, it became also a budgetary issue because at that point, starting from the very beginning, instead of building on something little by little, was definitely a challenge. So this was, my experience in the States and in Australia, and moving to Saudi, which I've been in Riyadh for the past year, more or less. It's a very exciting scene because it's a totally new scene. But on the other hand, we need to start from the very beginning. And so it is a fantastic opportunity to start with the most recent digital tools in order to set up not only new institutions, but also to try to work in the institutions that already exist, like the National Museum and other museums. What I do believe is going to be very important is that we act at the same time addressing customer experience, which is one of the of the main points of digital transformation, but also looking at operational processes, which is another big area of digital transformation, so that we can offer not only a good experience in the digital areas to visitors coming to physically visit the museums, but also we are able to catch them before and to catch them after, so that it's going to be repeat visits and the experience itself is going to be a positive one. But we have to start from the very beginning, from online ticket sales to the possibility of having surveys at the end of the visit. But it's a lot about creating a digital environment while the visit is happening, so that especially the younger generations can have both an educational experience, which is obviously the first thing that the museum wants to do, but also have an entertaining, and I put it in brackets, of course, but an experience that is going to be positive to the point that they will think that they've had a good time, basically, within the museum, and they're ready to go back or to bring their friends back.
Yes, because I mean, that's the secret, right? Which is, how do you cross that fine line between being entertainment, what we used to say when I was in museums, not being Disney, but being engaging enough that, you know, that people want to continue their engagement with the museum. And it's a very fine line. We want to be authentic and to the science, to the art, etc., to the history, but I think it's a compromise. We don't need to be boring, right?
Exactly. And certainly I would never use digital tools if I wasn't convinced that internet and they're presented to the public as a narrative, that's the core experience. So the digital is a tool that will help giving a much better experience and an easier way to learn really what the museum is about and what's the vision and what the emotions are about.
Yeah. Unfortunately, you cut out for a little bit there as well, so we're struggling with the demons of the internet today, but that's okay. Can you talk a little bit about Saudi Arabia's sort of priorities as a government, as a country? Like, what are their priorities in this space? You know, you talked about online ticketing and entertainment, but, you know, if you look at it, what is the country trying to achieve, and how does it feel about culture?
Well, the two key, and that's why it's very exciting to be in Saudi Arabia at the moment. It's because there is a clear push to create a new way of dealing with cultural and tourist environments. So the Vision 2030, which is this obviously this idea that is in the mind of everyone who now works in Saudi Arabia. The two key words, literally, for the Vision 2030 that was issued about 3 years ago, I think, at this point, are culture and tourism. So it's about opening up the country and opening up not only to visitors, to new visitors and international visitors, but especially to create a new social environment in which especially the younger generations are going to react and to react positively and to be engaged in cultural experiences. So the museums are, of course, only one small part of what the Ministry of Culture is trying really to develop in all kind of areas. Keep in mind that the Museums Commission, of which I'm the CEO, is one of 11 commissions. So you're looking at least 11 cultural areas that are being developed very deeply at the moment. So in the case of museums, obviously, what we have is an environment that is developed at a very, very basic level, and so we need really to push for things to happen and to fill the gaps in order to reach international standards. But specifically in the digital transformation area, it's one of the pushes that the Ministry of Culture is giving to all the commissions to create within their strategies a very active policy, a very active strategy in order to incorporate digital transformation. And this is not only to reach out to the younger generations, because if you think for a lot of younger people, the word museum in itself doesn't really sound like a fun thing to do. So we need to create that perception that it is actually a good place to go to, especially for the younger generations. But this is obviously a tool that we want to develop for all kinds of visitors, for all kinds of people who are very much used now to use tablets, to use a telephone always in their hands, to have virtual reality experiences, augmented reality experiences. We can put all these in the service of the museum experience on the customer experience side.
Yeah, I think that's important. And I know museums have been around the world have been thinking about, really how to use technology authentically in the experience. But so going back a little bit to like email, because I remember that was actually one of my first early roles in technology, was setting up email for the company that I worked for. And at the time, it was exciting because it used to be that email was just within your was exciting anyway. Email was just within the company that you worked in.
Yeah,
and then,
Intra. It was called Intra.
Yeah, and then like I remember someone telling me at the time that they could now email their wife who worked for a different company, and that was revolutionary. But I think remaining authentic and staying with the current tools of the time, which everybody is using and is used to, but doing that in an authentic way is clearly a priority. You also talked about back office, and something that I've been passionate about is the idea that technology is not just visible technology. It's not just about the visitor experience, but it could also be about making your operations more efficient, or reducing your cost base, or reducing your energy consumption, all of these types of things. Can you talk a little bit about some of your priorities in that area?
Well, I think that because there's a lot that needs to be developed on the business side of these new museums, but also the museums that already exist. After business opportunities, and this is going to be very important. So it's not only about the business opportunities like having a fair museum, retail shop, the day by, but it also things.
Unfortunately, I can't hear you.
Oh,
yeah. I don't know why that is. That's unfortunate.
I don't know. Can you hear me now?
I can now. It seems like if I interrupt you, then I can hear you again. It's strange.
So what I was saying is that we are creating within the Museums Commission a department that is going to look at the creative ways of doing business opportunities within the museums. But also we are going to create a small department or a small section that we call Museum Digital Innovation Hub. So what we want to have, and this is going to be an important thing for me to do, what I hope to be able to do is to attract digital leaders who have a specific passion for museums or for the arts, and trying to bring them into my own staff so that they can creatively interact with the business section, the curatorial section, the education section, and we can really work together towards having creative ideas and new ideas, not only for the customer experience, but also for the operational processes, the back of office, as you say, that is so important to be able to run the museums today.
Yeah, yeah. You know, I often talk about, I don't know if you're thinking about this, I often talk about Internet of Things, right? And sensors to like preserve collections and preserve the environment of collections. And it's a little bit like, you know, what's the technology of the time? And it's still evolving, but it's pretty mature, saving energy. It's, you know, it's a lot. There's a lot of opportunity, I think, in this space. So.
Oh, yes. You know, creating. No, we will be building new museums, and I do hope that we can have green buildings to start with, of course.
Yeah, and also I think the creation of digital from the beginning when you're building a new building. Have you given any thought to that? So I think for many museums they have old buildings and they're adding on after the fact, but starting from scratch would be interesting. How are you thinking about that?
Well, obviously, we are developing a few concepts for new institutions, for new museums, and this is certainly going to be one of the basic things in whatever brief we can have for the physical aspect of the museum. So definitely, it's going to be in our mind to develop this part of the brief.
Yeah, great, great. So, can you talk a little bit about how culture is part of the culture? So I guess cultural experience is a part of the culture in Saudi Arabia. What I notice is, you know, so I grew up in Australia, so you know Australia well. Australia is interested in culture, but it's not the be all and end all of it. Whereas I find Italy, I deal a lot with Italy, and you're Italian as well, big piece of the lifestyle. Can you talk a little bit about how you see Saudi there in that spectrum?
Yeah, true. Australians really want to go to the beach mostly, right?
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, of course, it's a work in progress.
Right. Oh, you've frozen now. Oh no.
Right.
No, you've frozen up, Stefano.
I don't.
And strange. We're gonna get this troubleshooted by the end. Seems like when I start talking, it seems to help. Yeah, we might need to leave it there, unfortunately.
Okay.
You're back. Let's see if we can just get a couple more minutes in before. I don't know what's going on with the internet today. It's
Yeah.
maybe
Okay.
everyone's on it or something. I don't know. Yeah.
I don't know. I have a strong signal in my apartment, so
You do.
I hope
No,
it's
I
not.
realize.
Yeah.
Yep.
So what I was saying is that it's really a work in progress because from the cultural point of view, it's a push that everyone is doing at the time. And obviously, COVID hasn't helped in the past year, but it's clear
Right.
nations are responding very, very positively to any type of cultural event that is put together. I know, for example, at the time it's a
Mm-hmm. Right.
Which was a total first for something like that. But also,
Yeah.
word of mouth that people would attend, and they had really no expectations, and it turned out that about
Right.
the course of a weekend. So this was obviously a proof that there is a time place, and I'm sure that things are going to be moving in this direction in a post-COVID-19 situation as soon as we can.
Yeah. Yeah. You did cut out a little bit there, so I didn't quite catch all of that. But I'm so sorry about I'm so sorry about the technical challenges that we've had today. It's been a delight to talk to you. I hope you have the opportunity to be able to stay for the Q&A or stay for the rest of it. But if you can't, that's fine. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Catherine. I appreciate really the opportunity. Thank you.
Yes, and we look forward to working with you. Good. All right, our next guest is Ahmed Ameen, who is the Regional Education Director from the United Arab Emirates. And Ahmed, welcome.
Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you.
Hope you can hear me.
Yes. Well, it's been great working with you for the last couple of years, but great to have an opportunity to chat to you. So, Ahmed, just briefly tell people what your role is. Your focus here is part of the larger education team, and of course, libraries and museums is an emerging vertical within education, but your scope is much broader than that.
Thanks, Catherine. I've been in Microsoft actually for around 14 years now. I've been working in the education industry for almost more than 20 years across different other companies. But throughout my time in Microsoft, I changed a couple of roles. From solution specialist to managing the overall education business for the Gulf region. And it's been a very informative experience, I have to say. I managed to work with many of the governments in this region in how they shaped the future of education. And I think that the last 10 years has been really interesting. So pretty much my role is everything that we do with all academic entities, from universities to public schools to private schools. And recently now, libraries and museums also falls under the industry of education. So I'm actually now, in the last couple of years, I've been also having the pleasure of working with some of the major libraries and museums in the region.
Yeah. Can you give me some reflections on, I realize you're not from the museums and library space, but the work that you've done, and what are you seeing as sort of trends? But also talk more broadly about some of the education trends that we're seeing, because all of these are educational institutions, of course, right?
Well, if I would highlight one, I think throughout the last 10 years, countries have been being challenged on how they can modernize education. And I think the main issue was coming out of skilling. That we need to equip students with new skills, and slowly the world started to realize that people without degrees are actually leading the biggest companies in the world.
Right.
New jobs that being created that has nothing to do with what we're teaching our students in the curriculum. So
right.
The overall education legacy business and dynamics has been challenged. And countries went quickly and they said, well, the easiest way is let's deploy technology. So I've been in the experience with many countries where they went and they bought millions of devices and they just distributed it to students, which created actually a negative effect, because teachers were not ready for that. Students abused having that access. Teachers were trying to control this whole situation because they had full control of the classroom, and then all of a sudden everything is like going all over the place. Teachers don't even have the knowledge or the skills to use that technology, while students are very quick into adopting these. So it ended up that technology became a mixed feeling topic, and many people up all the way until the ministers and the politicians had different schools. People were completely against it, and some people were saying, no, but that's the right way to go, but we just did it the wrong way. And we had the pleasure as Microsoft, to be honest, in the region, that we led with what we call the Education Transformation Framework, which is an approach that Microsoft uses to guide customers on how to use technology. And it starts without technology. It starts with what are the basics that you need? Are you incentivizing teachers? Are you training teachers? Forget about the device, forget about the shiny objects and the bandwidths and the tables and the servers. The actual best implementation of technology is that when you don't feel it, it's there.
Exactly.
And I think a lot of that goes very closely to museums and libraries. I mean, you still want this traditional, classical charm of when you enter a library or a museum. You don't want to feel that you're entering NASA. So yeah, we had a lot of experience in that, and I think many projects that failed taught a lot of others, and we kept on doing many of these projects. The most recent that was really successful and was sustained until now was the Mohammed bin Rashid Smart Learning Program. We joined forces with them and guided them step by step almost 7 years ago. And from that, we ended up with many other projects. And quite interestingly is when COVID hit last March, we realized that the countries that actually did this implementation correctly managed to recover so quickly and jumped into the remote learning model, as opposed to the countries that didn't do that. Even we saw a difference between private schools, which financially they have much more capability than the public schools, but because they were not prepared with that, they didn't manage to jump in quickly into remote learning, and they were stumbling for a couple of weeks trying to figure out, okay, how we do this? Is it Teams? Is it Zoom? Is it internet problem? Do we have devices? So many challenges. So I think this whole one-to-one initiative that started, it moved into what we call digital classrooms. In general, it's implementing technology into the education or the teaching and learning experience has been a big trend that we've learned a lot from in the region.
Yeah. Super interesting. I think, that trend that you're seeing around people who are prepared versus not prepared, people who see digital and technology as a tool to enable what they're trying to do rather than looking for something shiny, they're the ones that have been the most resilient through this process. And I think we've seen that with all industries, but libraries and museums as well. We've got some who are very, every country is different, but some who are very comfortable with technology and have really been working with it and embracing it for a long time. We're much more prepared. But ultimately, the thing that I found interesting, and maybe the same as in education, is ultimately everybody worked out how to pivot. Everybody worked out how to react. And so sometimes I think, I see in parts of the world where we have to do a lot of time thinking and preparing and whatnot to be able to embrace technology and change. But when we have to, we can. So the question is, how do we replicate that again, right? I'm always interested in, do we need a crisis to be able to replicate that level of change?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think, as many said, that we've seen a transformation in a matter of 2 months that we haven't seen in 2 years.
Yes.
We've been discussing remote learning, digital learning, virtual schools, all these concepts, we've been discussing it, but we've never managed to do it. And I remember in March in the UAE, when the pandemic started getting serious and the government decided to do a lockdown. The Minister of Education in the UAE just came with this very bold decision, and he said, education cannot stop. In 2 weeks, schools are going to start online. And the ministry had no clue how are we going to do that. We have classrooms, we have physical boundaries, but just due to that they started the smart learning journey 7 years ago, they had at least the fabric of that. And in a matter of 2 weeks, we had on one day 700 students up and running in their classrooms virtually from their homes.
It's amazing. It really is. Yeah. It's amazing what people can do when they have to, right?
Yes.
But I think that's important, the idea of education never stops. And I think, museums, I know that this is much more my area than yours, but you've done a lot of great work in the UAE. Museums are increasingly looking at how to engage digitally and also how to monetize, but not just monetize from the idea of sake of monetization, but looking at diversifying revenue sources away from just the physical experience. And then realizing, I think there's increasing realization that actually physical and digital are just different channels. And there's no reason why you can't have the same production value or the same type of experience in digital as you have in physical. But it's hard to get there. And, and I think that is what I've seen as the big change that will come out of this. I think there was a lot of, everyone got on social media because, you have to engage. So everyone got on social media. Everyone then did webinars. We did the same. And then increasingly it's being like, well, how do you actually create high production sorts of experiences in this space. Can you talk a little bit about, UAE and how it thinks about museums, just as a country? I see that there's a lot of investment in a lot of museums, new museums there.
Yeah, I mean, I think culture has been added as a major priority, tourism and culture, I think a couple of years ago. And a number of museums that have already opened and are operating, like the Louvre Museum in Abu Dhabi. There's also the Future Museum in Dubai, who's scheduled to be also opening very soon.
Beautiful building. Beautiful building.
Yeah. I mean, I see it every day when I'm going back and forth to the office before the lockdown, of course. But there's a number of focus on this, and I think the direction now is to try to centralize all of this around what's going to happen with the Expo 2020, which has been now moved into October 2021. So that's going to be a major focus in the region. We're talking about over 70 countries are participating in this. And it's interesting, the discussion that we're having with most of these customers now, which is all about how can I balance between the physical experience and the digital experience. And immediately, as you said, I mean, they immediately started thinking, yes, we might have by October 2021 a vaccine and people will start traveling, but there's an experience that we went through that we cannot neglect. That people now expect anything to be offered in two ways. Physically, but also I need a digital experience. Not every time I can afford to travel. For example, Expo, we were saying education is big for Expo, that they want students from many countries to come and visit the Expo, visit the museums in Dubai, but not every country students can afford such trips. So now the digital experience that they forced to look into is actually going to solve that problem, because now they can access students wherever. Anyone can access that museum, anyone can access that Expo. So that's pretty much, the real focus now is really how to balance the experience in all these museums and libraries and exhibitions.
Yes. As a resident of UAE, I compare it to, say, places like the United States, which values culture, but doesn't value culture to the same degree, is my perception. And I don't know whether that's true or not, but I mean, I've noticed that in countries like Italy, Egypt, Greece, a lot of these with rich, long histories that go back thousands of years, that culture is much more part of the country than what we see in maybe places like certainly Australia. So don't get me wrong, we used to go to museums and things like that as well, but it wasn't, I don't feel like that same passion. Is that your observation in UAE?
Yeah, and I think it's a new thing. I mean, there was museums in the UAE, but very small. I mean, people would not notice them. It's a new trend, I have to say. And I think, sorry.
Oh, okay. I'm just agreeing.
Yeah, I'm saying it's definitely a new trend. It's a new culture to the culture in this region, but it's something that they're embracing very quickly. As much as they embraced that we need to be advanced, we need to have large malls, we need to have big towers, but something is missing. And I think that's when culture hit, and we decided that, there's another element that's needed that brings back the history, the learnings from all of that, the access to information, the collaboration between different people, and they're reinventing. So and that's, I think, the good opportunity when you're launching a new museum. You get the chance to revisit everything from ground up. You're not constrained with, okay, it has to be a building, everything has to be in glass, and artifacts has to be like this. You really have the idea. That's why, for example, Museum of the Future doesn't have any artifacts, but it's more based on experiences. How can you experience the future? So even though it's a museum, but it's a museum to experience the future. So now you have museums where you can go see the past, but you will have one that you actually experience how the future will look like.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you so much, Ahmed. It was great having you here. I hope you can stay for our Q&A. I realize it's getting late there, and you're in Dubai, right? Just right.
Yeah. Almost getting ready.
I forgot to mention that to the audience earlier. But thank you so much. I hope you'll join us for some questions if you can, and look forward to seeing you in person again soon. Not sure when that'll be. Thanks.
Thank you.
So our final guest today is Essam Makhlouf. Some of you who have seen me in my travels around the world may have already met Essam previously. Of course, Essam is based in, welcome Essam. He's based in Cairo, Egypt, but he is actually responsible for libraries and museums in the Europe, Middle East, Africa region. But he's done some great work with Grand Egyptian Museum, with Library of Alexandria in Egypt, but of course, actually across the whole region. So first, welcome, Essam, and look forward to chatting with you. So maybe you can sort of start by talking about some of the work that you've done and some of the, I'm really interested in the work in the Library of Alexandria, UAE. Talk to me about what's happening in the region.
Yeah, first, thanks, Catherine, for the opportunity today to talk about this amazing region. I'm, of course, managing Europe, Middle East, and Africa, and this is actually an interesting region to work in with lots of history, lots of background, large civilizations for many years. So museums come very natural to the whole region of EMEA. And of course, for many years, a part of the countries in the Middle East, specifically like Egypt, and all the region has very long history. And museums come very natural to that, and also libraries. One of the oldest libraries in the world, the Library of Alexandria, was in that region as well. So I'm very excited about this part. What I find recently in the recent years is we all see that there is like an extra attention to culture from this region, specifically compared to other regions. Like in the Middle East, we have great examples that have been there for quite a while, actually. Some of these are started many years ago, like the National Museum in Egypt in Tahrir Square, which is renovated. We have recently a Royal Opera House in Oman, in Muscat, in 2011, a National Museum of Oman in 2016. That's some of the recent developments. Qatar National Museum followed that, Museum of Islamic Arts in Qatar, National Museum, of course, in KSA has been for a while. King Abdulaziz Historical Center in KSA, as Dr. Stefano, of course, mentioned lots about KSA. Of course, there is the National Museum of Civilization in Egypt as well. Many museums also in UAE. Louvre Abu Dhabi opened 2017. Museum of the Future just opened last year. And we have a lot that's happening in the recent 10 to 20 years, like very evident advances in the culture sector. That's very clear across all the countries, which is an amazing era, like what the New York Times has actually referred to as the golden age for museums in the Gulf region. So it's very exciting. On the side of the libraries as well, we see great initiatives here. Like it's very old libraries that exist like many thousand, actually hundreds and thousands of years, like the Library of Alexandria, but also somehow recently, like 150 years ago, the Egyptian National Library and Archives was there. One of the oldest libraries as well is the Kuwait National Library, the National Library of Kuwait, about 100 years now. King Abdulaziz Public Library, of course, in Saudi, King Salman Central Library, Library of Alexandria in Egypt, again, the new version, which is now less than 20 years, so it's a new renovation, amazing one as well. Mohammed bin Rashid Public Library, Qatar National Library. So all of these, like also amazing libraries, some of them are just in the last 10 to 20 years as well. Yeah. So this is like a big focus on that. Many museums are under construction in the region. Amazing ones in KSA are happening hopefully soon. Zayed Museum, Guggenheim Museum in UAE. The Grand Egyptian Museum is going to be one of the biggest museums in the world and the biggest museum for a dedicated civilization that's opening soon. So again, that's a great focus on both libraries and museums and the culture in general in the region.
Yeah.
That's very interesting.
It's amazing how much construction there is going on right now and how much discussion about museums and libraries there is. It's and they're also magnificent buildings, right? The beautiful architecture. But it, you know, something that you talk about, the golden age that the New York Times referred to. I look back. A lot of museums around the world are having their 150th anniversary in the Western world at the moment. You know, where I previously was at the Museum of Natural History. So we go back to like the 1870s, and that's when you start to see a lot of museums starting in the United States, and around that time and a little bit earlier in the United Kingdom. And actually, that just reminds me, for those who are not familiar with the term, KSA is the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And UAE is United Arab Emirates. So not everyone's familiar with those terms. That's the context. So can you talk a little bit about, the other, our other two speakers talked about culture and tourism as being great priorities for the country. I'm sure Egypt has been a tourist destination for as long as I've been alive, and probably longer, much longer. But can you talk to me a little bit about what the digital priorities are of these organizations? How are they thinking about digital and technology?
Yes, that's a very good question. Actually, there is a particular now focus on that. I'm of course originally from Egypt, and this is actually an amazing country to be for someone who is interested in museums and libraries, of course, with all the history and all the projects that are happening, especially recently. And most of all the effort that we see now are focused on engaging digital transformation very early, even in new constructions or new buildings or new ideas for either attracting tourists, tourism, or on museums and libraries. That's engaged, part of the DNA. I see that a lot now, especially in new constructions across the region, in Dubai and in Egypt, of course, and in all the countries. Digital transformation is always part of the agenda, part of the original designs, which is something that's amazing. It's new. Usually, museums and libraries were always in the previous years, culture was not like big part of the table. It was something on the side. But now seeing that being in the blueprint now in all of these new museums and libraries, that's an amazing one. And it has been like in the past few years, some of the pioneers in that, the Library of Alexandria as well, have a huge data center and a huge HPC center, which is one of the top in the regions actually. And that's all because of including technology early on in all the designs. And I'm sure we'll be surprised by many new museums opening with amazing technology there.
Yeah, I think there's always been, the museum and library world's always had this like love-hate with technology. But, going back 20 years, there was a lot of conversation, which is, the concern about technology, meaning that if people experienced it virtually, then they would not come to the physical experience. And I think, data has shown that that's not true. If anything, it inspires people to come. But I know that personally, I was going to say this when I was talking to Ahmed, personally, I have the silver lining of COVID has been my opportunity to travel around the world virtually. I was already traveling physically, but now I'm doing it virtually. But I can actually see more things, and I can hop from, as I did the other day, from India to Russia to London to Egypt, and I can experience everything that those museums have to offer. And I think that this will be, we'll look back on this as a pivotal point. But I think that the Middle East is further ahead than what we're seeing in the United States and the United Kingdom, where they're seeing about that idea of digital from the beginning, and particularly on all of these new projects. Can you talk a little bit about libraries? Library of Alexandria in particular is a famous national library in Egypt. How are they thinking, or how are national libraries thinking? So I know you're dealing in Qatar as well, about digitization and discoverability of collections in those sorts of organizations, because I think that's an area that's prime in this space.
Yes, actually, this is very interesting. I think preservation And of course, digitization and the digital transformation is a big topic there. One of the challenges that we find in the region is the use of Arabic. Not many solutions are tailored for Arabic, so some of these libraries actually had to rely on existing technology and advance their own versions. This I saw a lot in all these libraries are advancing their own technologies to actually help digitize old Arabic books and old documents. That's not an easy thing, and also the Arabic language is not an easy language. It's a rich one. And to do that using technology, I see many projects that are happening inside Library of Alexandria. I visited the library. It's an amazing one. Great team are doing great jobs there in that area and in many other areas. So technology is integrated as part of the library with many displays, with data centers for researchers. Big topic on researchers and discoverability as well is going there. Archiving of the internet, even taking like a historical snapshot for the world, because libraries are not only regional for their countries, but also they are part of the world heritage. And they consider themselves like that. So using technology even to browse the internet, keep some copies for references, analyze that, digital, of course, discoverability of documents as well, integrating all that together to provide something that the whole world and the world heritage actually will benefit from the technology now. It's the time that technology can now have these advances. That's something that wasn't available before.
Yeah,
I
such
saw
an interesting point.
Examples.
Yeah, we noticed that because a lot of the technology companies, including our own, have grown up in a world that uses Roman character sets. That a lot of the technology natively works with that. But then, of course, when you look across the world, you have Arabic character sets, you have Russian character sets, you have Japanese, Chinese, lots of different character sets that do not deal as well with technology. And we're also seeing, when you go back to some of the British collections, the beginning of print, medieval sort of era print, even in Roman characters, has been challenging to deal with. But imagine and I think this is what gets me excited about national libraries, is imagine what happens when you start to mine all of that across all of those different types of characters and languages, and being able to sort of understand sort of history as it's been recorded during the time rather than as it's written after the fact. Super interesting. That's something I hadn't thought of. I think this is part of the privilege of living or growing up in an English-only environment. English being a dominant language, you forget that you need to think about other languages and other character sets. And I think there's a long-standing conversation around accessibility that is around people who are blind or disabled or deaf or have other sort of cognitive, but there's also accessibility in terms of lots of other characteristics as well, like do we only want to knowledge mine English, or do we want to be able to knowledge mine other languages? So really interesting. We need to wrap up, but any sort of closing points before we wrap up and go to quick Q&A?
I guess that's amazing. I think that I'm very happy to work in such a region. It has rich language as well as rich culture heritage.
Yes.
Even inside each country, there are amazing examples of like local teams using Microsoft technology now, like in Egypt, to even inside each country, there are different dialects, even not only it's one single Arabic, but different dialects. And recognizing that and having a center, one of the 4 centers of Microsoft for research is actually located in the Middle East, in Egypt. That's an amazing thing. It's not serving it's serving the whole world, but that's amazing as well, and provide opportunity for such research and advances for them as well. Yeah, that's something amazing to happen. So thanks again for the opportunity today.
Well, thanks for all your great work. Essam is very passionate about this space and has been a great colleague throughout this. So thank you to all of our guests. We just have 5 minutes quickly for Q&A, and we have a question here for, we're just going to give our producer time to get everybody on the screen. We have a question here for Dr. Stefano Carboni. We'll wait for him to.
Yeah, can you? No, you can't see me. Let me try again.
We can hear you though.
Yeah, I can hear. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, we can see you now. Great. We have a question here, Dr. Carboni, what are the themes of the museums that you're planning to build? Is there kind of any common themes there?
Themes? Well, no, the majority of existing museums in the kingdom are what are usually described as heritage museums, which is a little bit like the National Museum has been set on the curatorial side, having been, of course, 20 years ago quite an advanced museum at the time, and so having to condense basically everything in the history of the kingdom. It is a little bit of a museum of natural history, a museum of archaeology, a museum of the history of the kingdom, Islamic art, and the most recent history of the House of Saud. So we want to build, of course, on this type of approach, but we also need to diversify quite a lot because there are museums that in many countries would be taken for granted in many ways. A museum of contemporary art, a museum of art in general, a museum of natural history in itself, but also a lot of smaller type of specialized collections. And so we are working on a strategy. We have quite a few museums that are already in the making and they've been announced, like the Museum of Contemporary Art, like a museum dedicated to contemporary art, but with a look on the history of oil, and so also the economic history of oil, a museum on the Red Sea and based in Jeddah, which is related to the history of the Hajj and the trade in the area. A museum dedicated to an important musical figure, Tariq Abdul Hakim in Saudi. So we are moving in many different directions, and hopefully by 2030, quite a few of these new institutions will be up and running.
Yeah, great, thank you. I don't think we have any other questions. I think I just want to sort of like wrap up, and we're about at time anyway, but I think, you know, if I was to sort of say the big takeaway, not the big, but a significant takeaway from this compared to the rest of the world is how much investment there is in libraries and museums, and how much digital is sort of there at the beginning of the conversation, and thinking about this physical digital blend is really sort of, you know, I know we have a global audience here, but that's really what I'm looking for as sort of like as what I've really noticed, and has certainly come out in today's conversation. And I think maybe the other thing is, you know, you talked, Stefano, around Vision 2030, and this idea of the country having, you know, a set of goals to reach. Is something that I also think is very unifying and very interesting and very forward-looking as well. And I don't see that in all other countries. And so that's really, I think, this idea of a central policy coming from the government that looks at that is super interesting. Well, thank you all so much for your time, and thank you, Heather, for producing this. And I look forward to working with you all in the future in lots of different capacities. And thank you so much. And thank you to our audience for coming today. Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you so much, Catherine, everyone else. Okay, bye.
Bye.
Thank you all for joining us today. As a reminder, you can access the event recording at the same location you joined today's event. Lastly, your feedback is important. Please take a few minutes to let us know how we did by completing a short survey that will appear in your browser window shortly after the stream ends. I'd like to extend a final thank you to our presenters. This concludes today's event. You may now disconnect.